But I want to turn now and talk about the CNN town hall last week. Last week, CNN held a town hall for the Democrat presidential candidates. There's actually a one-on-one on stage for each of them to go up and talk about, their view on climate change, on global warming, what they want to have done, what they stand for, and all of that. So they had a series of one-on-ones. I want to play a few of the things they actually said. And then what I really want to challenge you, and I want to start and end this segment by saying this. Everyone on the planet Earth wants clean air and clean water. All politicians, all oil company officials, all people, every continent, everybody, every background, everybody wants a clean and safe environment. We want clean air and clean water. Nobody is knowingly and intentionally destroying the climate. There is a group of people in this world, the climate change advocates, true believers, who are convinced that the world is about to come to an end in 10 years or 12 years due to climate change. And this has been planted, this seed of thought has been planted in America now for decades. This idea that the climate is changing and that somehow we're in great peril and we need to do something drastic in order to save ourselves from this impending climate change. I'm going to talk about some of the things in just a moment that don't really add up. But first, let me have Matt the Wonderful play clip. This is clip 4, the CNN Climate Town Hall. We'll start. That is a series of just short clips by several of the different Democrat presidential contenders.
Now,
I think we need a president, hopefully Bernie Sanders, that reaches out to the world, to Russia and China and India, Pakistan, all the countries over the world, and say, guess what? Whether you like it or not, we are all in this together.
Let's talk in language that is understood across the heartland about faith. If you believe that God is watching as poison is being belched into the air of creation, and people are being harmed by it, countries are at risk of vanishing in low-lying areas, what do you suppose God thinks of that?
And so my plan actually calls for new civil rights legislation to be able to address environmental injustice, including making sure that there is a private right of action to go to file lawsuits against polluters.
I'm telling you, folks, I want to play those 3. We're going to play in just a second here. We're going to play clip 6, is in particular something that Bernie Sanders said. But I just want to hit on a few points that these people were saying. The entire town hall, 7 hours, put on by CNN, dedicated just to climate change, and all the presidential contenders. Actually, I think Kamala Harris might have had a conflict, and she did hers separately. But in any case, they were all there. Let me just point this out. Starting in reverse order. You had Julian Castro saying that he would give a private right of action. Let me explain in plain English what that means. Every climate activist in this country, under legislation he would support as president, would have the right to go to court and sue, who knows, sue oil companies, sue manufacturers, sue oil processing plants, sue anyone they wanted to claim that the conduct of that entity is hurting the climate. Currently, those kind of suits are thrown out because the plaintiff lacks standing. We have, fortunately, in law, the concept that you can't sue somebody else just because you don't like what they're doing. You have to have standing. There are legal standards that apply. He's saying he would support a law that gives anyone in the country, and this town hall, by the way, was filled with people desperately frightened and afraid of climate change. I mean, some of them asking questions could barely hold back their tears to ask their questions. They had young people just imploring Biden, for example, say, you're an old guy, you don't understand, and you have friends in oil companies, and they've supported you, and don't you understand? I mean, just hysterical. And so those people all could tie up industry officials and major corporations in courts for decades because if Castro got his way. Just one little example, it's not just that it's an inane idea. It is that the idea itself it is a symbol, it's a mechanism used by Castro to give power to people who are completely lame, have no idea what they're talking about, who want to go to court and and tie up time in court arguing over these things, it simply would advance the climate change agenda. The companies would finally say, whatever we got to do, we can't be sued all the time. Then you had Buttigieg about this God is watching. You know, it's a really interesting thing. The idea that, and we'll talk more about this either today or on another show, but there is more talk on the part of conservatives and Christians with the idea that this whole climate change movement, this climate change fear, this climate change activism is really arguing from the start that there is no God. That is the premise of it. There's no God, there's no creator. All that really exists is the earth just happened to come into existence by some, long ago bang or whatever explosion, and that all of life is meaningless, and we're just this whole notion of climate change has to do with the idea that God doesn't exist, and that this power, this omnipotent power that is God, doesn't exist. In fact, some of the comments after this Buttigieg segment online, people are saying, "What's he bringing God into this for? What does God have to do with anything?" And there really is a growing willingness and awareness on the conservative side to say, I really think it's a little bit arrogant of the climate activists to assume that we, mere mortals, mere creatures on this earth, would have the power to destroy the creation God has made, destroy the earth, because of the parts per million of particles of one kind or another in the climate. It's a little bit absurd, and I actually think more people of faith are waking up to that argument that, come on, this is getting crazy. You think that, X percentage of particles of CO2 versus something else versus in the environment could actually kill us all. And so I think it's actually a great thing that you have more awareness that this Buttigieg kind of raised the wrong point, I think. And the last one, I'm going to go ahead and ask the very wonderful Matt to play clip 6. This is Bernie. I want you to hear Bernie Sanders, what he had to say at this town hall relating to, and let me do one quick thing before we put on Bernie. Bernie Sanders has already proposed a $16 trillion package to fight climate change. He says it's over a 15-year period, but still $16 trillion. And I want you then to hear what he has to say about climate change.
That is, everybody in this room knows. I mean, this is a difficult issue. Nobody has a magical solution. I don't. But this is not just an American issue. This is an issue that impacts the entire world. So what I would do, unlike President Trump, who has turned his back on this issue, in fact made it significantly worse by expanding the use of fossil fuel, what I will do, and I'm not here to tell you that I think it will happen like this, but I think it's worth the try, that in this extraordinary moment of global crisis, I think we need a president, hopefully Bernie Sanders, that reaches out to the world, to Russia and China and India, Pakistan, all the countries over the world, and say, guess what? Whether you like it or not, we are all in this together. And if you are concerned about the children in your country and future generations, we're going to have to work together. And maybe, just maybe, instead of spending $1.5 trillion every single year on weapons of destruction designed to kill each other, maybe we pool those resources and we work together against our common enemy, which is climate change.
I'm actually genuinely, sincerely beginning to worry about Bernie Sanders' sanity. I know people say crazy Bernie all the time, but I want you to hear in that, and I could have played dozens of more clips. There were many clips worthy of being played. But I want to make clear that what the left is doing with this issue is planting and fomenting fear, hysteria, and outrage. They are planting and fomenting fear, hysteria, and outrage. They're causing ignorant people to actually think that there are legions of politicians, people who work in the oil and gas industry, people who work in the fossil fuel industry, people who work in fracking, people who develop energy, that all of these people would willingly and knowingly go forward doing what they do, recognizing that they are destroying the planet and we're all going to die. That is what they are really arguing, that these people, all of them, every one of those candidates up there, by the way, we're talking about the Green New Deal in a moment, but every one of those candidates was trying as hard as they could to virtue signal their awareness of the problem, their outrage that they can't get every change they want done, the idea that people dare to question climate change, that people dare to talk about climate change in any way other than to salute to whatever plan they come up with. And this is truly, it's going to be, I mean, you may listen to my show and think we have a bunch of issues on the table in 2020, like border security and America's identity and immigration policy and tax policy and just all sorts of issues. But for some people, the idea that the earth might end and that there are people, I mean, millions of people in our country who know the earth might end and don't care, they actually may vote on that issue. So I want to go through, because it's important, if you listen to the show and you know how much I talk about America and preserving America, it's important to be able to talk about these ideas in a way that is intelligent, conversant, sharing facts, sharing information. Let me start with this is now Matt the Wonderful, clip 5. This is a news article headline. I want you to see the headline first. First, the UN predicts disaster if global warming not checked. I want you to read that caption again. The UN predicts disaster, okay, if global warming not checked. I want to just tell you the substance of that article. They talk about a senior UN environmental official says entire nations could be wiped off the earth by rising sea levels if the global warming trend is not reversed. Coastal flooding, crop failures will create an exodus of eco-refugees, threatening political chaos. Governments have a 10-year window of opportunity to solve the greenhouse effect before it goes beyond human control. Warming is happening. Polar ice caps are melting. Ocean levels are going to rise by 3 feet. They describe areas around the world. Coastal regions will be inundated. 1/6 of Bangladesh could be flooded, displacing 1/4 of its 90 million people. On and on and on and on and on. Just catastrophic, end of world type predictions. And that article was from 1989. And the predictions they said that I was just reading to you in that article, if we don't do something drastic by the year 2000, it's all over. The world ends. This was the UN, not some goofball, Occupy Wall Street protester. This is the UN, the alleged experts that we're supposed to be listening to get information to understand what is true and what is not true. My point in this entire segment is that facts still matter. Truth matters. It matters what is true. It matters what the true measures are saying. It matters what's really happening, not what climate models predict will happen. We don't have to salute to the UN just because they put out scary predictions, and they continue to do it. There were 2 UN officials I've read these on the show before, their names and where the statements were made, 2 UN officials who admitted on the record that the basic agenda of climate change is global wealth redistribution. It is the purpose of climate change to force, to justify, to scare people into agreeing to a massive global wealth redistribution. Now, my buddy Matt, we actually have I think I called it can't remember what it was, but it's the graph we have that has, this is a graph showing a big study done recently. And I don't know if you can see well what you're looking at, but I'm going to tell you basically what this graph is saying. If you can see, there are pink lines across the top. And these are measures. Pink lines are the data provided by the various measures that the UN, the IPCC, rely on, these climate models they create, because much of the fear mongering about climate change comes from climate models. They say, well, we've put this factor and this factor and this factor in, and you can tell, we can model the future, we can prove what will happen. And look at this. So the pink lines all across the top, you're going to the top of the screen on temperature anomalies that will happen on all these various factors they measure. What you're seeing at the bottom is truth. Is actual numbers, is scientists, and there was a group that just wrote a recent report talking about the difference between reality, between truth, and what the climate models say. The truth is, you see the blue line toward the bottom, much of the change that the left claim was going to happen is not happening. It's just not there. The truth is, there is not this hysterical, unbelievable, rise and danger flowing from all these models that the climatologists think up. This is a paper by John Christie, the director of the Earth System Science Center and distinguished professor of atmospheric science at the University of Alabama in Huntsville, and an Alabama State climatologist. So, when real climatologists do real studies and show you that the left's fear-mongering models are inaccurate, you know what usually happens to them? Because we've talked about this in the show before. They lose their jobs. In fact, we've talked about professors who even dare whisper a hint of, maybe I'm not on board with this climate change agenda, and they lose their jobs. Lose their jobs. In fact, one professor was writing about the idea, no matter what department you're in, no matter what issue you want, if you apply for grant money, research money, and you don't kowtow to the climate change agenda, you don't say somewhere in your application for the grant, this, and climate change, by the way, let me throw in climate change, you're less likely to get money. The climate change agenda has just overtaken public schools, public universities, professors everywhere. And so young people graduating from high school these days are unaware that there are actually a world of people who don't in any degree agree with a climate change catastrophe model. And I want to just tell you one other thing. We're going to keep hitting this issue because the left is going to have a field day between now and the 2020 elections on climate change, because President Trump has pretty much dismissed it, and he is permitting the growth of fossil fuel development. He supports fracking. He supports getting the resources out of our earth that make life comfortable and successful for all of us. I want to hit one other specific point today on this climate change thing. You hear expert after expert, and you hear public officials and President Obama and all sorts of speakers say, well, there's a 97% consensus among scientists that man-caused catastrophic global warming is a real threat. And please recognize all the adjectives I said. Everybody understands that climate changes. Everyone understands the climate up and down. Since way before man lived on Earth, the climate has changed. Temperature averages have changed. The ice pack has changed. This is climate. This is just life. But what you had start and get planted in the minds of people who didn't know was the idea that even though climate always changes, we're now at a phase that somehow man-caused climate change, anthropomorphic, man-caused climate change is happening, and it is catastrophic. Now, no one's saying that man's presence on Earth has no impact at all. No one's arguing that. No one's saying that, we have no impact on the environment at all. The question is, how significant is our impact on the environment? And how significant is the danger caused, the change caused by the presence of man on Earth? And then if you think anything of those two considerations, what is the right resolution? What do you do about it? If you're the American people, if you're the country, if you're the government, what do you do if you think, well, there might really be an issue here? Well, I'm going to start with this 97% figure, because as you know, you hear it over and over and over and over, and it is a myth. I urge you, if you're listening to this and you've never been to my website, go to americacanwetalk.org. I'm pretty sure I put a link to this article up. If I didn't, I will put it up. It's called the 97% Solution, but you can read this many, many, many places. This 97% statistic is used over and over to just mock, ridicule, and silence climate scientists and regular Americans who say, this doesn't make sense to me. I mean, this doesn't make sense that you think that this massive Earth could be destroyed by the presence of man, and by the, relatively speaking, in the grand scheme, the small amount of what we do adding to what the environment has. So let me just tell you where that 97% number came from. In 2009, there was a University of Illinois master's student named Kendall Zimmerman, and she had an advisor, Peter Duran. They did a 2-question online survey. And they concluded, based on the results of that survey, that the debate on the authenticity of global warming and the role played by human activity is largely non-existent among those who understand the nuances and scientific basis of long-term climate processes. So they did a big online survey. It was about 3,200 people, and they concluded, a two-question survey, based on that survey, that there was a 97% consensus about that man-caused, well, they were talking about global warming. Man-caused global warming, climate change is dangerous and is real, and that's the real cause. However, the facts they did not bother to tell you, only 5% of the people who responded, 5%, were climate scientists. The others are probably people like to hang around Bernie Sanders and go to those town halls at CNN and, oh yeah, I get to weigh in, sure, I'll do that. So 5% of this massive number, so it's 160 people, were actually climate scientists. Among those 160, only 79 self-reported as being climate scientists and actually having published papers in a journal that is, a peer-reviewed journal. And the reason that's significant is you can say I'm a climate scientist because you majored in climate science, but you've actually been working as a gardener since then, or you've been working as an architect. I mean, people who are accomplished enough to get published in peer-reviewed journals, down to 79 people. And among those, there were people who were varied expressions of how significant they thought the human factor was in this climate, in the changes they're observing in climate. They could pick things like, it's a significant contributing factor, blah, blah, blah. So the bottom line was, it was not nearly the numbers that they came up with. It was a complete farce, as a matter of fact. And some of the people in the whose data was used in the survey actually complained later, climate scientists, saying, you misinterpreted what I said. I don't want to be viewed like that. So this 97% gets planted. So that was published. And then there are three other scientists who went through different studies. All of them, essentially, when you look at what they were using for their data, it is not true that there are 97% of climate scientists in the country or in the world who agree that man-caused catastrophic global warming or global climate change is real. There are not. There are plenty of well-informed climate scientists who completely dismiss this bunk. On top of that, you have many times, as I'm sure you've read over time, you have all sorts of predictions by the climate scientists that don't come true. We're back to 2000. It was supposed to be all done for us. But by then, here we are in 2019. Seems like everything seems pretty fine to me. You have predictions from climate scientists. You can, in fact, they often run them on Earth Day. All sorts of predictions made by climate scientists that were, to use the words from the an AEI article, spectacularly wrong. And my question to you is this: how much change do we make to American policy, how much power do we surrender to the government? How much do we give when these people are wrong over and over and over and over, when every time the climate data is wrong, every time their models are way off and predict far worse numbers than are actually true, every time, in fact, even though we've had, I can't remember whether it's Arctic or Antarctic, but in one arena, the ice cap is growing, the other was diminishing some. They have endless stories about discovery of some ice cap they thought was about gone. In fact, it's bigger and thicker than ever. They go on and on and on and on. It's like they have settled on the idea that climate change is real and no facts ever, man-caused catastrophic climate change is real and no cause ever, no facts ever, nothing that ever happens can change their view. This is where the left is. And now I want to get around to why the left is there. Climate change. There probably are, there are millions of people who just believe in man-caused catastrophic climate change as, the end of the world, we're about to all die. And we have the endless we're about to all die pronouncements from people like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. She's now given us a 12-year break. I guess we now have whatever it is she's saying till 2030. But you have to recognize what the agenda is of the left in order to help you see they are using the climate change agenda to gain political power. The climate change agenda is about getting political power. The Green New Deal, as one example, the Green New Deal, which isn't a bill yet pending, but it was written by the most extreme elements in America, and written as a starting point thing. I believe every Democrat candidate running for president, still running for president, supports it. Some of them say it doesn't even do enough. But the Green New Deal parallels exactly the mission of leftists, whose mission is essentially to control every aspect of your life. The Green New Deal includes things like, in 10 years, no more cars. You don't need cars. You can use mass transportation. We're going to have clean, efficient mass transportation. It includes things like getting rid of the most affordable and available energy, which is fossil fuel energy. Going to get rid of that. We're going to put in place the less efficient, more costly, harder to produce, completely unreliable natural forms of energy, sources of energy, the wind and solar. But it's going to ban affordable energy, eliminate nuclear energy, one of the best sources of energy. There's a little bit of dispute among the Democrats that they want to do that. Eliminate 99% of the cars. And believe me, it's not going to be the politicians' cars that get eliminated. It's going to be yours. It's going to be the people's and our ability to travel freely. It is to gut and rebuild every building in this country, every home, every building in this country, retrofit for all sorts of environmental extremist demands, eliminate air travel. The Green New Deal calls for the elimination of air travel. If you could paint a society, paint a vision of the utopian vision for a radical leftist who wants complete control of every human being in this country, you'd write the Green New Deal. It doesn't have anything to do with environmentalism. It doesn't have anything to do. It's all about control of the people, crushing the freedom of this country, the freedom of the people to live in liberty, eliminating all air travel, a government guaranteed job. That's flat out communism. Just call it what it is. If the government takes money from other people through taxes and large taxes and taxes for the purpose of redistributing and can promise people jobs, the only way they have the money to promise everybody a job is to take more money away from other people. It's a massive wealth redistribution. It is planting the seeds of very firm and radical socialism on the way to communism. Free education for everybody, just like free everything for everybody. This is in the Green New Deal. Nothing to do with the environment, nothing to do with climate change, but it's in the Green New Deal. It's part of what the left is an organizing principle of the left in this country today. This whole idea of free money, it basically says they're going to make sure everybody, the term in the Green New Deal was, they're going to be able to provide economic security. Green New Deal, economic security for everyone unable or unwilling to work. It is very much going after meat and all these clowns at the at the CNN Democrat town hall, banning straws, banning meat. You know, who are you to have a cheeseburger? You can't have one. You have to see the Green New Deal and the climate change mission of the American left is all about gaining complete, absolute, unrelenting control over America. It is about destroying the freedom of America. It's that radical. And if you think for a moment that they won't do this, or at least attempt it, if they get into office, if you think that any one of those people running on the Democrat side won't do this agenda because it's too radical, it's too extreme, they're behind it, friends. They're behind it. This is not a pretend election. This is not a fantasy. It is a fantasy. It's crazy level fantasy, but it is exactly what they mean to do. They mean it when they tell you they want to do these things. And you don't have one Democrat on that stage willing to say the Green New Deal is nuts. In America, we do not guarantee economic security for all citizens. We do not guarantee free education. It has, and he couldn't give you the whole list. They have housing is in there, free housing, guaranteed safe, affordable housing, redoing every building in America. This is a complete government-controlled society cooked up by the American left, and you don't have one Democrat running for president willing to say this is outrageously un-American. When I talked to you yesterday or last week about the idea that freedom is on the agenda this fall, freedom is on the ballot in 2020, this is a perfect example of what I mean. Freedom is on the ballot in 2020. We better be wide awake to what the left will do if we give them the right and the ability to do it. They are not joking around. You don't find centrist Democrats even thinking about running for president. They don't have the base to do it. So they go further left and further left and further left. I'm going to close out the segment by saying we're going to be spending more time talking about Elizabeth Warren, because I think if no one else, if no other Democrat gets in the race for president, I think she'll be the nominee. She's trying very hard now to position herself as, well, Bernie Sanders, he's a socialist. I'm kind of more a capitalist. She's a rabid far left socialist. We'll talk about why sometime soon on this show. But I want to close up this discussion today about the CNN and the whole climate change thing to say you have to recognize it for the radical power grab it is. You have to see it for the radical power grab it is.